So I'm trying something new today. This is going to be almost like a podcast. I've chosen kind of an interesting topic, and I'm just going to talk about the topic while this awesome helmet cam footage plays. And I hope you guys are able to listen in and maybe enjoy some of the stuff I'm saying, or not enjoy it. And if you don't, please let me know in the comments below, because again, I am experimenting with this, and you guys are the first ones to kind of experience this type of video. So here we go. I hope you guys enjoy. So today's topic is going to be the classic question: is it about the bike or the rider? This is a really interesting topic. I love it because there are so many angles to look at, and there's just so much to talk about. So the answer to this question may seem obvious, but you'd be surprised. Many people argue both sides of it. I'm going to do my best to keep my thoughts organized and concise, but I can't make any promises. I can already feel a million ideas swarming in. Also, I think I'm going to leave my final opinion to the very end. We can cover all the bases and talk about each side of it and see where we stand at the end. So, let's rewind and start at the very beginning. Let's go back to when you first got into riding. So you're looking into getting your first bike, but you're just like me back then, and you don't have a clue what you're doing. Does it really matter? Will any bike do? I ended up on a small, tame, manageable TTR 125 with electric start. This honestly only happened because I went with what the salesman at the local dealer told me to get. He probably saw that I was small and had no experience and put me on the easiest bike to ride. Honestly, this was probably a good choice because I really was 100 pounds soaking wet at the time and had never ridden a motorcycle in my life. So I think this decision probably worked in my favor in the long run. Many people, however, do the opposite and go out and buy the biggest, baddest 450 motocrosser that they can find. And then they head straight to the nearest trail system with enough horsepower to win the tractor pulling derby. This could go one of two ways. So number one, they find the bike to be intimidating and hard to manage out in the trails. It scares them pretty bad a few times and they get discouraged. Because of this, they don't have much fun and don't end up finding a passion for the sport. That CRF 450 ends up on Craigslist 3 years later with only 10 hours on it. Or there's number two. They find the bike to be intimidating and hard to manage out in the trails. They power through and eventually meet some people who can offer some guidance. They eventually find their way onto a more suitable bike, and then they keep going with it. In many cases, the wrong bike for the job can discourage, intimidate, and even scare people away from the sport when they're first learning. I think that starting on the right bike can definitely weigh into whether or not a person is going to stick with it or not. That being said, there are always going to be those people who start on the worst bike to learn on and go on to become great riders. So, let's continue on with my next thought. Crutches. Do you need all the bells and whistles to up your game on the bike? Are your friends going to be riding circles around you soon if you don't drink the Kool-Aid and purchase the latest and greatest version of the Recluse auto clutch that they've all been deciding to run? How about the steg pegs Nance bolted onto her bike, or the bar risers Randy swears by? There are two ways of looking at this. One, you want to be able to ride the more difficult terrain and go on those long rides, but you're just not quite ready when it comes to your skill level and your stamina. So, you pull out your Visa card and buy crutches to help make these things more doable for you. Or two, you want to take the time to really get to know your bike, build on your technique and fitness, and make the bike work the way it comes. Now, I'm not here to harp on anyone with crutches on their bikes. This 100% comes down to your priorities. If you're just out to have fun and you want to make life as easy as possible, maybe you even have an injury or something that makes riding more difficult or painful for you, then sure, some of these crutches out there might be really good for you. However, if you're in this to learn and absorb everything you can, shave seconds off your lap times, and become the best rider you can be, you definitely don't need these things on your bike, and I'd go as far as recommending you don't run them. You will progress with time and practice, and in the long run, you'll be a better rider without all this crap bolted onto your bike. Okay, so where are we at so far? Having the right bike when you start out isn't a must, but it helps. And then you definitely don't need all the gadgets and bolt-on crutches to level up your riding skills. So my next thought is this. You've been riding for a few years now, and you're really comfortable on a bike. You're starting to notice the little things. Different tires seem to work better than others, your suspension doesn't seem right in certain terrain, and if you're like me, you even notice that different mixing oil causes the bike to run differently. Is there shame in worrying about tire pressure, suspension settings, and the type of mixing oil you prefer to use? No, not in my opinion. The fact that you're noticing these things just means that you're becoming a better rider. When I was first starting out, I had no idea that the tire I had on my bike was no good for slippery roots and rocks, but was ideal for desert terrain. I had no idea that the suspension on the used KX250F I bought was actually set up for a man double my size hitting 60-foot freestyle ramps. I was simply focused on keeping the rubber side down. Now that I have much more experience and have tried many different bikes and setups, I know that these things can make a world of difference. There is a reason the top riders worry about these same things. Tire setup for a top pro can be the difference between first place or second place in a race. Suspension setup is huge too. You won't catch a top racer out there with the wrong suspension setup. If you're not a top racer, it can still be the difference between a fun day out on the trails or a rough, frustrating day out on the trails, especially once you start to get into the more technical stuff. Let's go a bit more into detail about tires, because this is an easy thing to talk about. A motocross rider will ideally run a 19-inch wheel with a medium to hard compound tire. They usually run tubes in their tires with around 11 psi, let's say, depending on the type of track they're riding. They want that low profile and harder compound to corner at high speeds, and then they run tubes with air to get that light and consistent feeling, because the chances of a flat tire out there are slim. This exact setup would be an absolute nightmare for an extreme enduro rider. They would have no traction and would be working twice as hard as someone out there with a proper setup. An example of a good setup for slippery, extreme terrain would be an 18-inch wheel with a wider, gummy compound tire paired with a tubeless system set up at around 3 psi. This would provide the rider with the ultimate traction. Again, this setup would be horrific on a motocross track for any high-level rider though. I believe that there is no shame in getting right down to the nitty-gritty with these kinds of things, because they certainly can make a difference in your ability to progress once you start getting into the more advanced stuff. Is it a must? Again, no, but it certainly helps. So, honestly, what is more important? Having the best bike possible? Or is it the abilities of the rider that make all the difference? When it really comes down to it, I think a skilled rider can make any setup work. A skilled rider can even make the crappiest bike do incredible things. But a skilled rider on a properly set up bike can shine even more. Now, put a bad rider on a perfect bike that's beautifully set up for them, and they probably wouldn't be able to use the bike to its full potential. It might help them out a little bit, but it's not going to turn them into the Graham Jarvis. So, in my humble opinion, the bike and the setup is very important, but in the end, it comes down to you. It starts way at the beginning with powering through something new and difficult, then learning and getting comfortable on your bike as you progress, and then it all comes down to your dedication and passion for the sport. That's what makes you a great rider. If you have it in you, you will be great no matter what bike you ride and no matter how it's set up.